Welcome, one and all, to today's episode of the Wise Agent Society's National Real Estate News. Today we have world-famous Aaron Hodson on our show. He is a famed developer of brokerages worldwide, internationally. He's an amazing coach, a wonderful person, and we're very lucky to have him on the show. Thank you so much for coming on today, Aaron. How are you?
Well, thanks for having me, Shay. It's my pleasure to be here. I love the world renown. That's only because I've just traveled halfway around the world to finally end up here. So it's I appreciate it.
Well, I know a bit of your track record, and we're going to get into that. So I know that you've done very cool things internationally, and especially with Harcourts. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm teetering on my 30th year in the business, Shay. I've sort of been in all walks of life. I got into real estate when I was 21. Had a very successful career in real estate. I was the number one agent in Australia for nearly a decade, doing 700 plus deals a year. Got real smart, bought the brokerage that I worked for until I realized I'd basically bought myself. I was 80% of the company's volume, so I had a lot of money to buy myself. Grew that to be the number one brokerage in Australia, had 120 agents doing a couple of billion a year in volume. So basically a full-time psychologist. You'll know what that's like.
Definitely.
Sold that in 2007, just before the market crashed. I tell people I predicted it. I didn't. I just had a great opportunity to move on. So I took it. Then I took an ownership in Harcourts International, took on the CEO role with the goal of expanding it globally. So that was sort of when my world travel started. Opened real estate offices in China, South Africa, Indonesia, Dubai, spent a lot of time in India, a lot of other wonderful countries all over the world. Came to the US about 2011 to launch the group here, and basically sort of thought to myself, I'm going to do this for a couple of years and then it's going to be time for me to do something for myself. And so I sort of opened 50 offices for them, recruited about 3,000 agents, and then just sort of got up one day and thought it's time for me to do something different, a little bit for me. So I started doing a lot of speaking, a lot of consultancy work around growth, really helping people sort of navigate certain challenges in the market. And one of my areas of specialties is more on the business side of things. And, I can sort of get into that a little bit later, but, the key to success in my real estate career was not lead gen and things like that. It was just running a really, really good business. And I did that sort of volume only with a few people just because it was more about efficiency. There was a funky story there where I was getting out of control 90 hours a week, doing the same thing everybody else does, and just had to make some changes. And so that's sort of what led me into that business side of it. And obviously going through that with Harcourts, when I brought it here, just loved it, enjoyed what we were doing. When I actually got out of it, I was actually going to retire, Shay, and it lasted about 2 weeks until I realized that I need to do something. Otherwise, my wife was going to leave me and it wasn't going to be much fun. So started speaking all over the world around growth and just really how to make things work irrespective of what's going in the market, because we've had a lot more success when the markets are being tough than when they were good, because when it's tough, you've got to run a business. When it's good, anybody can kind of go out there and do it. Historically, that's kind of what we've been looking at the last 3 or 4 years. And then about 5 years ago, we launched the Sell Well Coaching Club, which was a little bit different. And it was more about building businesses around the individual rather than just having a specific product. Here's our thing. It was really just taking individuals and finding their strengths and building businesses around that. And, COVID sort of kind of helped us with that. I'll be honest, I was probably one of the few people that was quite lucky because it gave us the time to really sort of sit back and focus on those, those things that we needed to change. And obviously with realtors not out there doing the same traditional things, that was a really good leverage for us. And 5 years on, it's, we've got thousands of agents going through it and having a hell of a lot of fun doing some things a little bit different, and it's been a really cool journey. And I think, one of the luxuries I've had with traveling around the world and working with agents all over the country is you get an insight into everything. So you don't sort of get stuck in your own world about what's going on. You sort of get a real good overview of the struggles, the challenges, the different market types, and certain different ways you've got to navigate what's happening in the marketplace. So there's a lot of fun stories along the way in their show, which I'd love to share with you on another day, because it's, there's some interesting travel tips and tricks and sort of things that sort of didn't go so well being in third world countries trying to do what we do. But that's my sort of story in a nutshell. And, I've learned a lot of things through my career, and most of it's been through making mistakes. I think nobody ever really gets successful overnight with just finding a a niche market. Most of my stuff was just trying everything, working out what was going to work for me. And that's just in a business world as well. Growing real estate franchises and businesses in countries where the laws are different, different things around certain ways of getting business done. You've got to be quite creative. And I think that's always just stemmed through the way that we've done things. Is a little creativity, a little curiosity is always going to find a good solution for the things that we're trying to do. So, that's basically 30 years boxed into a little 2-minute, here we are.
Hey, I feel like that you've done this before, because that was impressive. You packed in a lot of info in that. Those few minutes.
With years traveling around the world doing it. I mean, the story gets interesting, and there's a lot of things you sort of think about. The lessons that you learn doing things in countries where you know nobody, no people. You've got to sort of discover ways of making things work, and it's it's a lot of fun things in there. A lot of fun. There is a book coming out about it shortly, so I'll get some detail.
I was just going to say that sounds like you have some great stories and perspective and insight, which is precisely why I wanted to have you on the show. You have a unique perspective that very few people have, growing such a huge company like that, and then in such a way. Now, I mean, I've known some other people like Chris Heller. He did a lot of international
Chris
stuff.
Very well.
Yep, for Keller Williams. I almost started running market centers for Chris. I just not to. So it's cool to be able to talk to people that have that experience, because that is a huge accomplishment that not a lot of people have done. So looking forward to talking a little bit more about that. And also, I guess we could share with the people, because I started the conversation off a little backwards, but how we know each other and how we got connected was from a mutual friend of ours, Alexis Papachristos, formerly KW, formerly First American, formerly Chase, I guess, in San Diego. I'm trying to remember where she was, but I think that's right. And I've been talking to her about a lot of different things. She's got a lot of cool new things going on, and she was just so excited to connect us. She's like, "Have you talked to Aaron Hodson? Do you know him? Have you watched his stuff?" And I was like, "Well, I haven't." I was like, "But I mean, it sounds like I would love to."
Yeah, she's an incredible lady. I met her probably 10 years ago, and she was one of my first ever, one of my first events that I did in San Diego. She was one of my first ever sponsors, and we just got on really, really well. Love the open mindset, the attitude of trying new things, and we've just sort of remained friends and colleagues along the way. And it's always, I mean, that's life, though, isn't it, Shay? You meet good people, and good people help you make good things happen. And I think that's the whole philosophy behind our business is, you get relationships, you keep them. The good ones are the things that are always going to help you. And Alexis is definitely one of those. We've become very, very good friends over the years. And, it's always really nice when you meet good people that can sort of say nice things about you. So, no, she's such a bright energy, and love having her as a friend and colleague as well. And how cool that she also is out there making connections for people that she thinks would be, good connections to have. She has a gift, buddy. She has a gift.
She really does. She really does.
Yeah,
so love her to death, and grateful that she introduced us. We spoke. How long ago was it? Has it been a few weeks?
It's been a few weeks,
since we chatted, and we just basically talked a little bit about, my history, of course, which is different than yours, but I've done things in real estate and had real estate teams and organizations in multiple cities and states. But what I like about yours is that you go even further, because you're international. So that might be my next step in maybe not in the same ways that I did it before, but to have business colleagues and relationships in other countries is something I would love to do.
So it definitely makes it fun, Shay. Like, I think, and hey, as everybody can tell from the accent, I wasn't born in the US, but I was born and bred in New Zealand, but I haven't lived there in over 30 years. So unfortunately, the accent hasn't gone, but
I like the accent.
So does my wife, and it's probably the reason that we're still together. She doesn't understand half the things I say, but the international travel for me was a really great way of because I mean, we always get the same things, like it's different here. Everybody sort of tells us that every market's a little bit different, and ironically, it's not. I mean, we look at them a little different, but even doing real estate in India and China and places like that, which are just fundamentally completely different. Every human being kind of wants the same thing. So the fundamentals of what we do is very, very similar. The process of how we do it can be sort of changed a little bit. But I tell you, that's one of the best things that I've ever learned is people don't change. We all kind of want the same things along the way. It doesn't matter where we're from, what we're doing. And it was just a really interesting thing to teach me a lot of things about business in general. And it was probably one of the things that I'm probably most grateful for is that ability to travel and experience, other cultures and other ways of doing business and just seeing how other people have adapted to change. And I mean, I think we're about to go through something very similar to that here, Shay, and I'm sure we'll talk about it today. But I think that just gives you a very different insight to disruption and when things sort of happen in the marketplaces and what it can do potentially negatively and also very positively as well. So,
yeah, we're definitely going through some changes. And like you said, we can talk a little bit about the lawsuits that people know that have going on, which, we don't need to get into deep about all of that, except maybe what the future might hold because of these disruptive legislation or whatever changes that might happen. But I wanted to ask you first about so India and China. That is super interesting, especially China, because they don't necessarily adhere to or they don't necessarily like Western, American influence. So I'm curious. First of all, maybe what were some challenges going into China to develop relationships, and how did you do that? How did you connect with people and or leaders of places there? I mean, did you have a translator? Do you speak Chinese? Like, how does that work? Like moving into China, that's super.
I'll tell you what, it seemed a lot easier before I got there, Shay. It seemed a lot easier. As a young entrepreneurial guy thinking China, this seems like a great idea. And I remember I got a very good wake up call within the first couple of weeks, but. Interesting enough, but New Zealand and China has quite a unique sort of relationship. There is a free trade agreement, so it's not easy to get in, but it's a little bit more accepted. Also, Harcourts was a 120-year-old company, so it had a lot of history and a lot of sort of value behind it. And it actually started. I met a young guy who did a college thesis on Harcourts and just the dominance that it had and the structure around the business. And then he introduced me to a gentleman in China. Who was very well connected. He was a big developer over there. So we had an in with somebody that was pretty well connected. And I mean, the one thing I learned very, very quickly, if you're not connected with someone that can open some doors, it doesn't happen. So we had some pretty good business partners, and I will not say that made it easier. It just meant we could get behind the door and have some conversations. Yes, I did have a full-time translator, but I also discovered after a few months that they all spoke English, just chose not to do it until it came down to the right things. And interesting enough,
sounds like France.
Pretty much. But we started really pushing the business idea of it first when the reality of it was we weren't creating the relationship. So once we sort of redirected, built the relationship, it started to go very, very well. We ended up opening a couple of hundred offices over there. You do lose a little bit of control with the internet issues because, I mean, obviously everything has to be housed in China. We had to rebuild all of our technology and translate it word by word. That's a whole different ballpark, but it sort of became one of those things we were so far into it, we had to keep going. Like you were so committed to doing what you were doing, and the challenge was quite interesting. You're going through all the sort of legal issues and really getting your business set up was a little different because it's not quite as sort of process driven as it is here. But once we sort of got our feet on the ground, it was great. Opening offices all over the place, very, very different business model of how they do it. It worked really, really well. Translator was a critical thing, but I did do 3 months of intensive Mandarin lessons to discover at the end of 3 months that my tutor basically said I should stop because my accent just made everything sound really strange and weird. So, but just choosing the people we did business with, a lot of preparation went into it. A lot of brand protection, making sure we really understood what we were getting into, and it ended up being a very, very good thing for us. Yeah.
Very cool. Did you have to start off kind of with government types? And that's maybe where it started, and then somehow you got introduced to the business people.
Yeah, and you do need to have a government sort of connection to sort of get approvals to do certain things. And I was lucky enough that I actually, before I went to China, we opened a large real estate group in South Africa. And South Africa's got it's not quite the government side of it, but they have a thing over in South Africa called Black Empowerment, just because of the way that the industry works and just the whole cultural aspect of it if you don't have black empowerment, which means you don't have that facility to work in some of the, the black communities, it's very, very hard to do anything. So we actually went through this process of how do we actually bring this types of things into our business. And once we'd done that, it was phenomenal. We opened 180 odd offices within about sort of 18 months, and then the market crashed, and that just sort of turned things around. We rebuilt it all over again. But so we kind of went through a very similar process there, understanding how you have to bring external, local people into your business to get that leverage. Okay. So I had a little bit of a test run at it before I went to China, and South Africa was a little bit more easier to get around. There's a real cultural connection between New Zealand, Australia, and South Africa, not so much in China, but because we'd been through that, it did make China a lot easier for us. Yeah.
Wow, that is cool. That is cool. And that is probably fortunate that you kind of experienced that before, which probably helped you to be able to do that in China. Yeah. And
I had a lot of luck.
And then I would say in India too, that was just another one. I mean, those are just such huge places.
Well, India was one we walked away from. And an interesting thing that a lot of people probably don't, it's only just been a recent thing of late. So we're a franchise business, and that's what we were at the time. Not anymore. Been out of that sort of world for nearly a decade now. But you're
talking about Harcourts.
Sorry,
are you talking about Harcourts?
Yeah. So and as a franchise, you are basically you charge per transaction. It's a percentage based thing, as all franchises work. But we also discovered there's only very few places in India where properties actually have a title. And that was becoming a little bit, trying to sell a property that doesn't have a title. And it was one of those interesting things that, okay, we can see a few issues here. And then also in the Indian market, they have a thing called the black and white component of a sale, which basically, let's hope this doesn't go to any political side of things. But and what they do in India is there's what part of the transaction's white, what part of it's black. And the white part goes on the contract and the black part's in cash. So it's really, really hard to understand what the actual sale price of the home is. And it's something that's always been done.
Wow.
It's a historical thing that's always been part of it. And I remember when I first walked into some of these real estate offices in India, and the first one I ever walked into was in Hyderabad, and there was a cash counting room at the back of the office. And that's how I actually found out about it. I go, what's people buying cash? They go, oh, that's the black part of the sale. It's how much cash they're contributing to the sale. And because we only charge fees based on the actual contractual price, we sort of got through the whole process to the end. We were very close to doing a very, very large deal and just decided it wasn't the right thing for our business, just because there was no protection. And the laws are pretty limited. There was no sort of entry level into real estate. Anybody could do it. So, it never eventuated into being a great deal, but it was one of the best learning things I've ever been to in my life. I actually loved it. I really enjoyed the culture of it. I really enjoyed looking at how things can progress over time. And that was quite a few years ago now. And I think the whole titling of properties has become something that's very, very common now. But when we started doing it, it wasn't. So there was just so many liabilities there that, with such a big company, it was just a little dangerous for us.
Understandably. And so did you mean that now that they're using titles in India, maybe now?
They're getting into it. When we first started, Hyderabad was the first state that started going through that, where they were starting to issue titles for property. And it was quite interesting. I actually had an experience with that before, because when we were actually in South Africa, it was one of the things that Nelson Mandela did with the townships, was actually issuing an ownership for the township property. So you have these little sort of shacks, and they were becoming owners. And it was one of the things that really helped with apartheid and giving people pride of ownership. So I'd kind of seen a sort of similar version of it. But the issue that you have in India is somebody could come back 20 years later and say, well, this was my grandfather's property, and you've got a fight on your hands because there's no actual legal title of ownership.
Okay. Boy, that is so interesting. Just to think that other places maybe haven't developed that far into, organizing this. And so that's a great thing for everybody that's watching this show to realize how fortunate we are to own land. I mean, like, just to be able to own your property and to have that title process and to be able to pay things off, and it's all tracked and organized. Whereas India, is it the largest or second largest population wise?
Second largest, I believe. Yes. I think China's still got the upper edge on that one.
So either way, both those places have a ton of people. And just think of, if you were living there, so the, percentage wise, that's the chances of us living there or being born there as of here is better. And so we didn't. But my point is that we are all very fortunate to have that. And we take that for granted. The way the American side of things work. We just think, how else? And people here don't even know how it works. Like, realtors do.
Yeah.
Well, most of us.
Most of us do, yeah.
And hopefully some of us understand it a little even. But yeah, just crazy to think about these other countries that maybe don't have that. Now does China have titles then, and how does that work?
Well, yeah.
And
Yeah.
the government.
China's very advanced, but it's also very segregated to what happens in China. So
Yeah.
it's all very structured. So it's very similar here. I mean, some of the countries that have had a little historic, South Africa with the apartheid and all that sort of stuff, India with its mass amounts of poverty and things like that, where it just wasn't available for everybody. And that was just a huge population. And that was just progression moving forward. And but the majority of everywhere else absolutely does. And ironically, it's very similar to the way it works here. And so it's interesting, as I've been traveling around, and when I first came to the US, my initial thought that the US market was very advanced. It was going to be a lot more advanced than a lot of the other countries that would work. And actually, I didn't find that to be the case, Shay. A lot of the countries like China and India, yes, 100%. It's way more advanced. It's a lot more favorable with title and, actually how we protect what we've got. But when you look at some of these smaller nations like New Zealand, Australia, South Africa to a certain extent, where they've got smaller populations, their advancement in the industry is actually a little quicker because you go through the cycles a lot faster. And so probably from what we're seeing things happening in our industry, I realized that we'd actually done a lot of the things or been through a lot of the things that we're starting to go through now here in the US, just because of the cycles and how things work. And it's a smaller population scenario. Things sort of happen a lot faster because you've got a lot less people to get through. So there's certain aspects of our industry which I think are really advanced, and there's certain parts of it that need a little bit catching up just to get up to speed with how the rest of the world works, whether it's right or wrong. It's not my opinion on that one, but it's just natural progression, how things change. Yeah.
That's so cool that you have that vision. I mean, you have that field of vision that you can see that, whereas people like me I've traveled a little bit, but not for business and not whatever. And I don't have that, knowledge or that vision to be able to see that. So very cool and interesting. I was going to say, I wanted to ask you real quick about Harcourts in Europe. Were you saying that it's real popular in Europe, or was it South Africa, or where was it or Australia?
So Harcourts is generally based in Europe. Actually, funny enough, wasn't a target market for the Harcourts group, and predominantly because there's a lot of the European nations, realtors are salary based, and trying to re-engineer an entire franchise that's built around a commission-only structure just wasn't worth the energy. So we looked at doing quite a few things in Europe, but the changes to the business and the fundamentals of how that company was run just wasn't something that we were prepared to take the risk on at that point, just because we had so much market share and dominance in New Zealand, Australia, South Africa. We really started to get things going in China, bringing the business to the US. We've got Dubai. We've got a few other places that they'd opened offices in. But yeah, it was just, sometimes you've got to go where the market best suits your business model. And for us being a complete service provider where everything was provided, training, education, marketing, the whole thing was provided. That's all based on sales and commissions. And when it's a salary driven business, it's very, very hard to make the adjustments to be able to pay for those types of things in the business to actually make a revenue stream that works.
So Europe is primarily salary based.
Yeah, and so the bulk of them tend to work where they get a base salary and a very small percentage of some commission that comes in over and above it. And quite often, honestly, it's quite advanced in the way that it works, but there's they don't have the sort of long-term reward that you can get here in the US. And I think that's one of the things that I think that people that are selling real estate here in the US should be incredibly proud of, or actually be incredibly aware of, is the income potential for earning is unlimited. And we tend to be the ones that get in the way of that happening. Whereas there's a lot of countries where you could go and do this, where it's just like a 9-to-5 job. Like your income potential to earn is kind of restricted just because of the way the models work. Whereas here, you can be a multi-millionaire overnight. You really can if you actually get what you're doing right.
Right. Yeah. As long as you can put in the work and the consistency and actually believe that you can do it, then it's possible.
Get right.
Very cool. I was going to ask with all of your travels, and this is kind of a fun question. Maybe did you have a favorite interaction with some kind of a bigwig or something that was interesting or crazy when you're dealing, like, a funny story, an anecdote, or just wow, I didn't expect that when meeting some
Yeah,
people
actually, funny
here
enough,
in China, India, wherever?
one that always pops to mind, and I do a lot of sort of business in the growth and leadership field as well, working with a lot of big brokerages and things like that. And we have these frustrations about employees and people that we work with in performance. And I always remember the lead partner that we had. His name was Ding Furu, who was the lead partner of our Chinese operation. And I remember that's probably the second or third time that I met with him. And everything's quite a grand gesture. So whenever you get invited, up to the office, it's like he's I think he's one of the top 5 wealthiest people in China now. And so I got invited up to his office, and we're doing this meeting, and I'm sitting in his office and waiting for him to come out. And he's got a huge office, probably 1,500 square feet, and it's just lined with TVs all over the walls. And I'm sitting there thinking, what's all this about? And he comes in, he sits down, and he's watching the screens, and a couple of red lights flash, and he jumps on the phone and didn't think much of it. And then when I was sort of talking to my translator after, I said, what was the deal with the screens? And every single employee in his office had a motion censored camera on their desk. And if they got up and left, a red light would flash. And he would jump on the phone and see where they were going. And then you talk about, wow, there's a really different way of driving performance. And I've never got that out of my head, because it was like, that was the critique of exactly how they ran their business. It was everybody at your desk doing what you needed to do. And, so that for me was a really incredible eye opener about performance. And then spent some time in Singapore, and I went and just met with this really, really huge real estate office over there, doing some really, really great things. And everything they did was all about cold calling. And basically they said, hey, do you want to come and see our operation? And so I'm curious about everything. And they dragged me into this huge office, probably, I don't know, 6,000-7,000 square foot. And it was just full of these tiny little pedestals with phones on it. And there was probably the best part of 1,500 people in this room just constantly sitting there dialing for dollars. And that phone could not be hung up for any longer than 2.5 seconds. They had it down to the second of how long those phones had to be dialing. And I remember I sat there and watched it for about an hour, Shay, thinking, like, if we could just show people what it takes and what other people actually have to do. And that was just a holy crap moment, sitting there looking at how this worked, to the fact that they had it down to the point where 2.5 seconds was the phone being hung up for too long.
Wow. That's incredible. I mean, that whole system, and those people probably weren't making hardly any money.
No. They only got paid if they got a conversion on the other end. So, and
probably still a little bit at that point.
Very little.
So it probably all filtered up to the top, whoever the owner of the business was, or it's what I would imagine.
It was just a traditional real estate brokerage, and their model was that they were super proud of their conversion ratio, which was 2%, which was kind of eye-opening to me. But I suppose you make enough phone calls, 2% can work out to be quite a large number. So but they've grown to be one of the top real estate brokerages in Singapore. So very, very different.
That is different and interesting. So, and do you know if they have traditional licenses and things like that? Like they have to get a license in India?
Have to get a license. Yeah. As long as, it's very similar to here. As long as you're not representing yourself. There's a lot of situations where you can have call centers you don't need to, because you're basically an appointment setter. Anybody that's discussing the real estate transaction needs to have a license. Ironically, Singapore's got some really good laws around that, so it's not too dissimilar to here. But it's kind of like us having an ISA. That they're not, they don't need to be licensed as long as they don't represent themselves as a salesperson. So, or as the agent.
Gotcha. Very good. Well, cool. Maybe then we could take some of this of your historical knowledge and maybe talk about a little bit about what's going on today with the lawsuits to the National Association of Realtors and some of the big brokerages. Pretty much all the big brokerages have been named in suits, and essentially the lawsuit is over price fixing. Isn't that what it is? So they're saying that that the agents have basically said this is the amount of commission that you have to pay across the board, which is to me insane, because that is the thing from day one I ever started in this business, was that commissions are always negotiable, and we do not charge average, fixed, typical, any kind of commission ever. That's all we talk about. So it's insane to me that there's even a lawsuit to be had, because first of all, I know a bunch of discount brokers out there everywhere. And so I don't understand, how we got into this mess in the first place, but here we are. And what's your take on it? And maybe why do you think we got to where we are, and what do you think about this lawsuit? Do you think it's
Well, it's interesting, Shay,
frivolous,
because I mean, I think everybody's going to have an opinion on it. And something that I've done my entire career is always focused on the listing side of business, because that's the one part of control. It's the only person that really technically has a contract, to get paid. Now, I've got a lot of different views on it. And I think, hey, it's just was natural progression in our market. I thought, there are some technicalities as to why that lawsuit came about. Without a doubt, NAR has always pushed the fact that it is a share the commission type scenario, and so that there is some validity to what they're saying about that they've kind of said, hey, well, you have to charge. But in all honesty, I think that whole thing was driven by the fact that that's where a big bulk of the membership fees come from. So you kind of want to support both sides. So but we're also seeing what's happening with NAR now. The governing body's having a lot of issues with leadership, and so that sort of the strength of that is kind of starting to weaken off a little bit. But I'm with you. Commissions have always been negotiable. They've always been out there. But if with any class action lawsuit, you get enough people involved in it, something's going to happen, and away it goes. We can sit here and worry about it. It is what it is. And I think, there's some of the bigger brands are going to fight it, and they're going to get involved in it, and it'll prolong, it'll drag out for years. So when we actually do see the result of it, might take quite some time before we actually get to that. I just see there was another couple of lawsuits filed this morning in New York and going to Arizona now. And I'll be honest with you, I think it's going to get to a point where it's just a money grab, Shay. People are just trying to see if they can get some money back. A lot of people overpaid for properties in 2020 and 2021. Maybe it's an opportunity to get their money back. But where it is now and what it ends up being, I'll be honest with you, Shay, I don't think it matters. It's only going to matter if you're going to invest all your time and energy into it. What we need to do at the moment is go, right, this has happened. And I'll share something with you, because we actually went through this probably about 16, 17 years ago in Australia. And it didn't happen because of a lawsuit. It actually happened because of a market change. Where we were going through a very similar market like we were doing in 2020, where average days on market were like 2 or 3. You'd have 40 offers on every property. And it was actually the buyers that just worked out that they could not get their hands on a property if they were working with a buyer's agent. Because, I mean, if I had a listing and I had 40 offers and one with a buyer's agent, really what I'm thinking, I've got 40 people that are going to work directly to get the deal done, or I can take this one where I've got somebody aggressively trying to bring the price down. So there is some validity in how that works. And so what ended up happening for me is 95% of my deals were just direct to me. People were coming directly to me to actually buy the property because there was too many offers. They knew their offers weren't going to get looked at if they were working with somebody else. And so the market actually went through that change then. It got deregulated. Commissions changed dramatically. The amount of buyers agents in the market just disappeared overnight. We went from probably 50-50 to probably there's less than 5% now. So the 12 months of it happening, Shay, was rough. And it was only because there isn't really a process behind the way the buyer's agent works. You find a buyer, show them homes, and hopefully they buy one. Now, I know there's a lot of good buyer's agents out there that have buyer broker agreements and do everything right. But let's just talk about the bulk of the industry as a whole. The majority of realtors that get in this industry might do 2 or 3 deals a year. And generally that's a buy, representing somebody that they know, it's a family member and things like that. So there's a lot of liability in the way that works. What did happen though, Shay, which I think is what this industry's needed for years, it now became a profession. Because for years, the real estate industry over here has always been known as a bit of a part-time thing. Half of our industry sells less than 1 home a year. That's a part-time gig that got their license. So the byproduct of it was the average income from the agents in Australia when this happened. Before it happened, it was about 80 grand a year was the average income. Once that sort of went through, it was well over 300. You actually had to run a business. You actually had to have complete structure around everything you did. The one thing I can see happening, we're already starting to build out processes for this, is that the actual buyer's agent's fee, now I'm going to be this is just my way of viewing how this would work, is I feel like the strategy moving forward will be this. We'll go into list properties. We'll talk about what our listing fee is. It'll be 3%. I'm going to list your home, Shay, 3%. Now, what we need to do now is discuss what the marketing side of the business is going to be. And some of that is potentially going to be looking at what we're going to offer from the buy side. And I've already had some of our bigger listing agents come back with sellers that have said, look, we're not paying any buyer's fee. We've said, that's fine. Hand on our heart, we're not thinking that's fine. But we've said, look, we give it a go 2 weeks, but you've got to understand, you remove that, you're going to eliminate 80% of the buyers in the market because they're going to be represented by somebody and they ain't coming to your home. So if you want to try it for a couple of weeks, try it. If you don't get the right result, then we need to look at what we're going to throw on the marketing side of things to bring a buyer's agent in. And just because we've got a strategy around that, it's really having some great success. They get it. I mean, it's nothing different to a coming soon. We're just going to try and sell it on our own. We give them a couple of weeks strategy. And the majority of sellers know that's how the business works. The majority of sellers know I need to access the buyer's market. And honestly, I'm going to get my the best price for my home if I expose it to everybody. Competition is always going to drive the highest price. The only thing that I say people should be super aware of is, as this becomes more of what it is, it's not going to take a lot of time before 3% is going to be it's just not going to happen on the buy side. It will probably settle in that 1 to 1.5% in a year or two, when that just becomes standard for what's available to advertise, because everybody will start doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But realistically, the only way to solve it, Shay, is we've got to have a massive portion of our business on the listing side. It's the greatest way to generate new business. It's the greatest way to protect your income. But we've also got to be very conscious that we're business people, and prices don't always stay the same. Products aren't always the same value. Sometimes there's sales. Sometimes there's changes in the market where you need to adjust your revenue streams.
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, the reason why a lot of realtors want the 3% is because they don't sell a lot of homes, and that's a big portion of their income.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's not what people want to hear, but it's just a natural change in our business where what we've always commanded is probably not what we're going to get in the foreseeable future. Now, it might take a few years to come in, but we'll always be able to command the 3% on the list side. We'll always be able to command maybe a little bit extra if we're looking at doing different things, bringing in buyers agents, so forth down that. But I do believe the strong listing agents are going to control a little bit more of the market, because they've got a contractual obligation to do so. They're just going to have to be prepared that they're not going to be getting the big chunks of cash like they have in the past. Simple solution, just sell more houses, because we are going to have a big reduction in the amount of agents in the industry. It's just natural.
Yes.
So I'm probably looking more on the positive side. It is kind of the shakeup that we've needed. And we had such a massive influx of realtors come to our industry in 2020 and 2021 because there was nothing else to do. So let's go get a real estate license. And so potentially thinning it out is not a bad thing. I know people are getting started and trying to get into the industry. It's probably not what they want to hear, but markets change. I mean, in every industry right across the world, you think about cars, the sale price, more of them come out, the value drops, and all of a sudden car salespeople don't make as much money. It happens across every industry that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just we've just got to build a business now that is focused on more repetitive transactions, retention of people. And when we get to that point, it's going to be different. And ironically for me, Shay, when I was selling and I went through that change, I thought this was going to be a big problem for me. I was a top listing agent carrying $100 listings, and all of a sudden I'm thinking, like, what the hell am I going to do? Like, this is really going to cause me some problems. My income doubled.
Wow.
And my work hours went up significantly as well. We had to do a lot. I made a lot more money because the exposure of what I was doing was a little bit more valuable. A point of difference and a true value proposition actually became something. Mm-hmm. Whereas at the moment, most people think we all do the same thing. So the whole focus now is, if you don't know what your point of difference is or what makes you different to every other realtor, you will become part of the casualty of what's happening. If you can stand there and say, look, I know what makes me different. I know what I'm really good at. I know the value that I bring to the table. This could be the potential to make more money than you've ever done in your career. And I think why a lot of people are struggling is they do believe they're just the same as everybody, and I'm having my income taken away. Maybe it's time we stepped up and show people what our true value is.
Yes.
And we've got
I agree with all that you say there. And somewhere in early on when I started as a realtor, which is 10, 11 years ago, whatever it was, 10 or 11 years ago, maybe 12. Anyway, however long ago it was, that it doesn't matter what the economy is doing necessarily, but it matters if houses are transacting. If people are buying, selling houses, or losing a house, getting foreclosed on, any of those things are all transactions where a realtor as a business person gets opportunities to make money. So it doesn't matter if prices are up, prices are down, inventory's up, inventory down, people are losing their jobs. None of that. I mean, it's relevant in the way it's not relevant to success. So I've known and believed from the beginning that great real estate agents and business people survive no matter what the market and economy is. Therefore, what people need to be doing out there is controlling that narrative and controlling their own destiny and being proactive in concentrating on the opportunities that are there. So, things might change, markets might change, but the opportunities just change. They're still there. So you can become a millionaire. So many people became millionaires during the last recession, and when everybody was getting foreclosed on, short sales, all of that. Agents went through the roof successful. Just like you were saying, when you had that shift there, that your income doubled, or your efforts might double too, and that's fine, and that's likely to happen.
Work a little harder. Work a little harder for a little bit more money. And I mean, we got very spoiled through COVID because we didn't have to do a lot. I mean, most of our listings were sold before we even took a photo. So it was like, we got paid a lot of money to do very little. And I know that's a little controversial to the industry that we're in, but we went through a purple patch, which was, from my side of the world, that's a good spot. We went through this patch where everything was easy. We could do whatever we did. And, it's interesting for me because with all the travels we've done around the world, all these sort of market corrections are different everywhere. Like you could have a great market here in the US and it could be really struggling in China, or you could, really just depending on where you are and what the economy is doing. And one thing I've always seen in over 20 years of actively being in that sort of side of the business is however bad that sort of downturn is, the recovery is always twice as good. You get a slow downturn in the market, but the upturn's about the same. But this one was so quick and so fast, and it just put us in the mortgage business was a big part of the problem because we've actually never, in the entirety of what we've been through in the last 5 years, had a problem with the real estate market. The real estate market, low inventory, great prices, everything on that side of it has been incredible. What we actually got at the tail end of the pandemic was an affordability crisis. And that's where the issue came, is everybody still wanted to buy homes. We all still had money, we could do it, but at 8% interest rates, it just didn't make it feasibly possible. So we still had the want, we still had the drive, we still had the people that wanted to do it, but the affordability issue was a real struggle. So if these things have happened so quickly that it's actually caused what most people are thinking, man, this has been one of the roughest markets we've been through. It was just because it was so quick. I mean, you and I have been around long enough now. I mean, 08, 09, we saw that thing coming 12 months out. It was like a train with a big light on. We knew it was happening, but this one was so fast. Nobody expected it. We didn't expect to see what happened in 2020 and 2021. A lot of people reaped the rewards. 2023 was a bigger shock for everybody because it was so contradictory to everything we've ever seen. But maybe that's exactly what we needed, was to get our eyes and our focus all shaken up so that we could actually relook at what we're going to do moving forward. And this for me becomes the greatest opportunity because you're now forced into a situation where you're either going to stick doing what you're doing or you're going to make some significant changes to move forward. And everywhere I've ever been in my life, Jay, that recovery is always going to be as good, if not better, than the downturn. I think this is probably one of the worst ones because it was kind of like a tap got turned off. It wasn't slowly working its way. It just went, no, we're done for a little bit. And we're starting to see some good recovery now. We're starting to see a lot of positivity in the selling market. A lot of my top listing agents now are doing a lot more business than they've done, quite honestly, than what they were doing in 2020 and 2021. But it's just a lot more work involved, a lot more preparation, a lot less winging it and actually having to have some serious plans and budgets around what we're doing, really understanding seasonality in markets where it's just not always going to be super consistent. Ironically, the same as running a normal traditional business. You've got to be ready for it. And, I think those that are prepared for it are probably going to, I personally think we're probably going to go into the best 2 years that we've seen in a long time for those that are running a business. The potential to make consistent income is going to be real because your competition is going to be a little less. The sellers that you're dealing with are looking for true value. So if you've got that dialed in, the next 2 years could be the best, the best opportunity for most of us that we've seen in quite some time, providing we're ready for it.
Yeah, I agree. I'm super excited and optimistic, especially for this coming year. It feels like things are lining up to be have a lot of activity. That's a good way to put it. So I'm excited to see that and feeling good. We are getting close to the end of parts of the show, so I wanted to go through a few things with you. I have a couple questions about some things you just said, and then we talked about a few cool, tricks and tips and tools to use at the beginning of the show before we even started. So I wanted to just point out a couple of things. I love your idea about, hey, you're this Mr. Seller, you're hiring me to be your agent and to sell your house. And that's this fee. And then this fee is for the marketing side of it. So this is for me to handle this, and this is to bring in, other opportunities and other people and agents, and calling it a marketing side, I thought was pretty brilliant. And I just thought that was a good idea.
It's funny enough, Shay, it's just a way of repackaging things, and one of the things that we've always sort of said to people, there isn't anything new in this business. There's lots of new technology and things like that, but when it comes to negotiating, when it comes to what we do as a process and how we sell homes, there isn't anything new. What there is the ability to take old traditional ways of doing things and modernize it, find a different way to present it, find a different way to word it. Because it's like a script. Any script can be great, but it's how you deliver it and how you execute it, which determines what the result is, how you use your words, how you go about doing it. And so really all we were doing there was just giving it a little bit of an easier process for the seller to digest it. Because straight away they think it's sweet, I don't have to pay a buyer. You're right, you don't. You never have. Never have had to.
Right.
But what you do need to understand is what the consequence of not doing it is, which is great. If you want to only deal with 5% of the buyers in the market, pay your 3%. Let's go out there and see what we can do, but be patient because it's going to take a little longer. If you are prepared to invest a little bit, it's no different to staging. It's no different to anything else that we do when we're selling a home. We just have to repackage what that buyer's fees looks like. Now, based on how much you put out there, will increase the number of people that are going to come through. So if you want to throw out 1%, yeah, we might get 30% of the people. But if you want to put a traditional fee out there, like what everybody is, and we can negotiate with it, like let's throw 3% out, and then we can look at what we're going to do based on the offer. Now, if they come in with an offer that's 100 grand below the list price, we can talk about that. And so it just gives us the ability to present it to people with a little bit less of I've got to pay what? It just seems like such a large number. And it's like if we break things up, it's just an easier way of people to digest what we're putting in front of them. And most of what we do is just showing people different ways to present things we already know how to do, but giving it a little bit more of an understanding of the people that we're working with and how they're going to digest that information. We've been trying it for a few months, Shane. It's actually been working incredibly well because they go, it makes sense.
I like it. I think it makes a ton of sense. And that brings up something that I've done for years. And I was just talking to a colleague that is based out of California. And I've been asking people how I can help them this year. And she said, I'm struggling with buyer brokerage agreements. I want to make it a part of my business so that it's either a take it or leave it. Take it or I walk away. We're doing a buyer brokerage. But she's like, I'm trying to figure out a way to present that to people where that's digestible. And I said, well, I was like, let me think about it. And then it took me a few days. And the next time I talked to her, I said, hey, you know what? I've always called the buyer brokerage agreement the hiring paperwork. So whenever I'm talking to a client about it, I'm saying, hey, you know what? We're going to learn about your goals. We're going to talk about expectations. We're going to do all these things. And then if you like what you hear and everything about it, then we'll complete the hiring paperwork and we'll move on and we'll get to going. And that just makes a lot of sense, I think, rather than a buyer brokerage agreement. Sounds kind of intense, where it's like, well, this is just the hiring paperwork saying that, hey, I want to hire you to work for me exclusively and give me all of your time and energy. And I'm like, and she was like, that's great. I love it. And I'm
we've avoided it for years. I think nobody wants to talk about it. I mean, it's the very first thing I do. I mean, the expectation meeting for me is huge. If a buyer wanted to work with me, would sit in the office, I go, look, here's the expectations around working with me. This is an agreement, and I'd always ruled it the other way. This is actually for you, because if you actually want me to go out there and work my butt off and find you the right homes, you need to have me contracted to do it. Because if you're not prepared to do that, and you're going to deal with other people. If something pops up, I'll let you know. Like I'm going to put the same amount of energy into it. But what you are actually doing, number one, you're not paying for a single thing. Whatever I get paid out of this whole transaction is going to come from what's on the selling side of it. We just got to be very, very open and honest about things that are going on. But where the true value comes in is the representation that I'm going to have for you when we're negotiating, because I have the ability to sort of get in behind the scenes, see what's going on, and really be able to make sure that you're legally protected on everything that happens through the transaction. And that also comes at a cost, which you don't pay, comes on that side. We also do need to be conscious of discussing what's happening out there in the marketplace, which is that there is the potential that if I find you a property and there is no fee being offered, now this is what most realtors are going to do, Shay, they're going to scroll through. If there's no commission, it doesn't exist. They're not going to show it to you. It doesn't exist. If I've had a buyer I've been working for 6 months with, and there's a home that's perfect for them, and there's no buyer feed offered, I'm going to avoid showing them that all day long. Every realtor listening to this can do exactly the same thing. So I think it won't last that long, but we will have to go through some situations where, if I've got a buyer that's ready to go, they're fully qualified, there's going to be no issues, I'm going to absolutely accept whatever is going to be offered on the listing side to get that thing done and moved on. It's a sale. Whereas if I've got a buyer that's not really qualified yet, they're trying to buy a big property, they're so specific about what they want, it's going to take me a long time to do it. I'm going to do exactly what you said and say, it doesn't matter what happens, this is what the fee is that you're going to pay, because it's going to take me a lot of time to find exactly what you're looking for. I've had a lot of investors that I work with, an investor that I knew would see it, write a cash check, and we'd be over and done with. I didn't care what I got paid because it was all the additional ongoing business that I would get. So it's just about
case by case for sure.
Yeah, 100% case by case. I mean, I think, as the market sort of moves in the right direction, you could have a lot of buyers that are looking for very specific properties that they're very open to paying 3% to have you go find it. I've got a couple of clients now that are looking for areas where they can put on, trailer park homes and things like that, very specific types of things. Yes, they're more than happy to pay it. The only struggling area will be the traditional resale real estate, because it's all the same thing over and over again. The only thing I will say, Shay, is that when this happened many years ago in Australia, the first 12 months was pretty rough. Okay, it was a little bumpy, just people trying to find their way, work out what it does. But once it sort of settled in, it was completely fine. And the only advice that I think is prudent for everybody right now is you've got to have some listings in your pocket, because that's the only time you can guarantee to be paid. If you've got a whole pocket full of buyers right now, everything's going to have a gamble behind it. No point in getting frustrated about it. It is the market. You can't control it. You can't change it. The lawsuits are what they are. They're just money grabs. And, when something gets a little bit of attention, that's a news story. It'll get some traction. Go take care of your people. Get your listings, because that's where the market part is missing right now. Is everybody's sitting here worrying about where the market's going to go? In the last 3 or 4 years, we've probably been missing nearly 1 million sales listings every year just because of the market.
100%.
Low interest rates, people not needing to move. We had forbearances. We had all these refinances happening. And so on average, we were about 1 million homes short. And one of the things that I did learn that never, ever left me when I was in India was there's 3 fundamental things people need for life: food, education, and a house. The house is a major part of it. At some point, those life changes will happen, because 86 or 87% of every home sale that ever happens is for an emotional reason. Changes in my life, financial, kids moving, downsizing, all those things. They're not generally an economic thing. So those properties are all going to come back to the market at some point. Over the next 2-3 years, we're going to start seeing that upscale. They're all sellers. That's where we need to start focusing, because at 2%, everybody's a buyer. Everybody can afford to buy homes that they can't afford, so away we go. Now, we're on the backside of that now, where everybody that didn't need to sell is finance. The economy is still what it is. Income is still what it is. But I don't care whether you've got a 2% interest rate or a 1% interest rate. Financial struggle, that's still an expense. And there are going to be a lot of people that are going to need to access a lot of that equity that they built. So the listing side of things isn't going to be anything other than a massive recovery, because that's where we've had the biggest loss in our industry over the last 3 or 4 years, was just pure listing inventory. We've had a low inventory market since 2020, actually since the end of 2019.
Yeah, so it's due. It's due to come.
There's a bottleneck like the shades, but ready to pop.
I like it. I like that perspective. Yeah, cool. Well, then let's go ahead and just wrap up with a couple of cool tidbits that we were talking about for people that might be doing shows or doing presentations. We do a lot of things on Zoom and StreamYard and virtual things just like this. And we were talking about, you had mentioned, I had said something about they make eye trackers for AI, so that when you're looking at your screen, so this whole time I've been looking at your face on my screen, and then my eyes aren't necessarily like I'm looking straight at the camera, which is like this, because then I wouldn't be looking at you and I can't read your face. So they make software to do that. But then you brought up a very cool, and I don't know what that's called, by the way, the one I'm talking about, but it's out there. You can look it up. But you were talking about a cool tool that you use that, and maybe explain a little bit, OBS or Tiny 2?
Yeah, it's an OBS bot, which is, it's an AI webcam. It's called a Tiny 2. Super small, little tiny camera, sits on top of my computer, but it's completely AI driven. So human eye tracking, you can operate it with hand signals. You do need to turn that off though, because I'm a little bit of a talker with my hands. So every time I raise my hands up, it zooms in on my face, or it shoots off to another direction. But also the understanding, I think, is like, I've been doing this 30 years, Shay, and one of my biggest challenges is trying to keep up with technology. But we've also got to realize that how everybody digests their information now, and the quality of what you share with people is also enabling them to digest the information that you're sharing. And, for a simple little investment like this, I mean, COVID for me, I've spent many years as I've been a keynote speaker for 20 years. And when COVID hit, that part of my business kind of just sucked up and disappeared. Everybody canceled it. And then it went virtual. And, having the ability to give people an experience virtually is really, really challenging if you've got very, very poor quality equipment. So, can't recommend it enough. It's got great editing features. You can pretty yourself up. You can make yourself all look all good, change your backgrounds, but it's just got a lot more cleaner, sharper. One of the coolest features that I like about it, and this one I'd love to share because I think realtors could probably benefit from it. If you were doing a virtual listing presentation, it has, and maybe you've got a whiteboard in your office, or you've got a presentation lying in front of you, I can preset the camera, and I just have to do a simple hand signal, and it'll either zoom straight onto my whiteboard or onto the documentation I have in front of me, perfectly squared, right in front. So it just gives you the ability to be very interactive with what you're doing. And it always stems from a thing for me, is everybody remembers the experience that they have with you, not the end result. And if I'm sitting there doing a presentation with somebody and all of a sudden the audio is crackly, or your focus, your camera goes in and out of focus all the time. That's generally where their focus and their attention will go. Mm-hmm. And so the experience we create for people is super simple. It's one of those things. So don't avoid it. Go and find the thing that works for you. Spend a little bit of time working how to use it. It was a complete game changer. You don't necessarily need a good mic setup. I swear you do, because I mean the words are the most important things we're sharing with people. Has a great mic in it. But a super easy thing to do. And one of the things we did do some tests with is doing listing presentations with it, where it could zoom down on the different marketing things that we were using. Brilliant, super smooth, happens in a split second. So it's not like you're sort of scrolling down it automatically just goes straight onto it. So
that's cool.
They have tons of different variations, and I love the little small one. I can pick it up and use it anywhere. It's got a magnet on the bottom, so I can stick it on the fridge. It does 360 up and down, goes everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I'm going to definitely check that. And do you know what that costs, just roughly?
I believe it was about $250. I was quite more blown away with how cheap it was versus actually what it was. Because I've looked at many things over the years where they were $1,200-$1,500, and
Wow, I'm going to check it out. I could do a whole show on on different cool technologies and studio setups. And it doesn't have to be. It's not grossly expensive. It's not. But you just got to find something that you know how to work. I mean, we can get a little overcomplicated with some things, and I'm probably like you, Shay, where I spend a lot of my day sitting on Zoom calls talking to people, and I'm like, I got to be able to see somebody's face. I've got to be able to see what they're going through, and it's part of the way that we do things. But for me, it's the experience. It's making sure that the only thing you focus on is the message that's being delivered, and if it's poor video quality, or it's all over the place, or it's just not zooming in right, that tends to be what we focus on. So it's like a good TV show. If you're trying to watch it, it's out of focus, you turn it off. Right. Yep. You switch the channel. And then real quick, lastly, we were talking about Zoom summary notes, which is a really cool feature you can turn on when you're having a Zoom. And it's an AI bot that will just summarize your call and break it down into segments.
Just a new thing that came out. I think they launched it in December of last year. Given the fact that I spend so much time on it, I'm looking for every advantage I can get. And there was a new feature they launched, which was summary notes. And you just basically click it. If you're doing, if it's brilliant, if you're a realtor doing maybe you're doing a pre-listing conversation with a seller, and you really want to make sure you're tracking some information. There's a little button at the bottom called summary notes. Click it. It'll actually go through. AI does it, listens to the conversation to a certain degree, and then just basically gives you a summary note in time-stamped as well. So if we did one on here, Shay would go, it would talk about, Shay was talking about this, and then Aaron would talk. And so it's written like that. So it's written like somebody is taking notes and giving you time slots. So if you were recording something for YouTube and you wanted to cut it up to actually have some shorts you could send out, the summary notes would actually show you exactly where those key points would be. Wow. I've used it for every single meeting, and I attach that with a file with all my clients, and I have summary notes I can go back to now and actually review things we talked about on the prior meeting. So little features like that, which just become an absolute goldmine for us to be more efficient and better at what we do.
I wonder if those would, do you know if there's a Zoom, this is just curious, if Zoom does captioning after it records?
No, you've got to, I mean, if we want to do the captioning, we have to throw it straight into YouTube, and then that's where it'll actually automatically put the captioning on it.
Oh, yes. Cool. Because like this right here, what we're doing, live streams to YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, several Facebooks. Yep. So yeah, interesting. All great stuff, great information. Aaron, I wanted to thank you again so much for coming on the show. And I also wanted to let everybody out there know that Aaron has the Sell Well Coaching Club. So he's a international real estate coach, I would say, and also a keynote speaker. So if you ever want to get a hold of Aaron, which I recommend that you do, to look into his coaching program, it's all down at the bottom, sellwell.com. His phone number is there. If you want to give him a text or a shout, I'm sure he's happy to connect. And I mean, Alexis just said that we should get together, and we did, and we talked, and I'm so grateful that we did, because Aaron, I think you're a great person. You have the amazing perspective, and then I like how you're always gearing things toward business, and not in a dry or aggressive way, but more of a common sense. Hey, let's think about things in a way that is practical and that can help us grow in business. I think
it's very easy for us in this day and age, Shay, to focus on the negativity of things that are happening, and irrespective of all those things that aren't particularly great right now, there's still a lot of really positive things that we can put our head into. And I appreciate you mentioning the coaching. I know everybody's got incredible opportunities out there, and And I think one of those things that we've always said to people, we're different. We do things very, very different. We're more on the business side of things, really structuring how that works, building it around the individuals rather than, a key thing. And I think for me, one bits of advice I'd love to give, I don't care where you go or what you do, give it 100%, because the next couple of years is going to be incredible. And it's, whether you choose to, where you get your education, what it is you choose to do, I just say find something that works for you and stick with it, because the next 12 months isn't going to be one of those ones where you're going to be jumping around trying to try things. You've got to find your spot and go for it and take advantage of this opportunity that's ahead of us. And nobody's got any certainty about when that market's directly going to change, but it is going to happen, and it's going to happen pretty soon. And the one thing I always say is when you see something happen that quickly, where we tipped over the edge really, really fast into that kind of declining market, the recovery is always going to be about the same. So it's going to pick up just as quick. You look at 08, 09, that sort of where they had to slow downhill, slow uphill. So we're probably going to get a recovery a little faster than most people think. So get ready, dive in. If you have any questions, you guys can reach out to me anytime. I'm like Shay, I'm happy to share anything with anybody if they're prepared to ask the question.
There you go. And that's what I love about having the people on my show that do come on the show, is because we're all coming from contribution, and we're here to help people, with no expectation of necessarily personal gain. We know that when you come from contribution like that, and we share with so many people, that the rest will take care of itself. So
yeah.
Please reach out to Aaron, check out his coaching stuff. And then also feel free to sign up for all of his channels. I just recently have, he's always posting really great nuggets of wisdom on his, at least on the Facebook that I've been seeing. And so follow Aaron. And if anybody needs anything from me, I'm always here to help in any way. And we'll see you all next week on Sharpen the Saw, which is Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Central Time, 9 a.m. PST. And then we also have the National Real Estate News on Thursdays. So thank you all very much for coming today. Hope you have a good one. Thanks so much, Aaron.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Now for the outro.
Slow head bob.
Yes. I look like a DJ.
Yeah, you do.